Hi and welcome to this screencast on functions. Today I'm going to tell you how you create a function and how you work with input and produce outputs. I'm going to talk about variable scope and give you some rules of thumb when to encapsulate your code into a function. Creating a function in Matlab is quite easy. First you type in the keyword function and then you type in the names of the output arguments. I will just make a function with one output argument called result. Then I type equal sign and then the name of the function. In my case I'll make a function called sum and square. And finally I put in parentheses the names of the inputs to the function. I'll call these inputs A and B. So now I have a function called sum and square that takes two inputs, A and B, and produces one output called result. Now I can simply write my code. I can use A and B in my code, which are inputs to my function, but I need to do one thing. I need to produce an output into the variable result. So in this case I could write function like results equals A plus B squared. So that's my function. It takes A and B, adds them, squares the sum, and puts the result into the variable result. Now I can save my function. I do that by pressing Ctrl S, and Matlab will ask me to save it in a file called sum and square. And in Matlab, the name of the file you save the function must be the same as the name of the function. So I press save, and my function is saved now. Now I can simply in my command window type sum and square and put in two arguments, say 8 and 2, and it should add those two, that's 10, and square that's 100, and if I press enter I get the result. There are a couple of common mistakes that people sometimes make when creating a function. One common mistake is to redefine the variables, the input variables inside the function. So for example, if I say A equals 100 and save my function and I run it with 8 and 2 just like before, I see the result is not 100 as I expect, because even though we pass in the number 8 for A, it gets reset to 100, and then 100 is added to B, which is 2, and squared. So you must be careful not to reset the input variables. Another common mistake would be to forget to set the output result. So if I don't set result to anything, just maybe I save this in a variable called something else. Then when I run my function, you see nothing happens. There's no output. And there's only an output if the variable result is actually set to something inside the function. So I have to remember to say results equal and set all the variables that I have up here as the output of the function. Now I'll create a little script that uses my sum and square function. So I'll create a new file, and in my script I'll first make two variables, one called first, set that equal to 8, another one called second, set that equal to 2. Then I'll make a third variable called third and set that equal to the output of the sum and square function. And the arguments for the sum and square function will be first and second. Now I can run my function by pressing F5 or marking everything and pressing F9, which I'll do here. Now I can see my function is run, my script is run, and it calls my function. First is 8, second is 2, and third is the sum and square of the first and second argument, just like before. So we can see now the function, the variables out here are called first and second. They are passed into the sum and square function. Inside the sum and square function, then they are renamed to A and B. So sum and square doesn't know about the names of the variables outside. It just knows that it gets two values, A and B, and produces one result, which it then passes out again. And then the script puts that result into the variable third. So the variables in the script and the variables inside the function don't know about each other. We say that they are in a different variable scope. And that's a good thing, because that makes it possible to encapsulate your function and test it independently. Now here's a problem that sometimes occur. Now I've restarted Matlab and I want to run my script again. I mark my code and press F9, but now it says undefined function or variable sum and square. So basically Matlab cannot find my function. The reason is that for some reason I've gone into a different working directory. Right now I'm in a directory called home mnsc, but I saved my function in a different directory, and now Matlab cannot find it. So the easiest way to solve that is to put everything in the same directory and then change the working directory to that directory, which happens to be the screencast directory. Let me spell that correctly. Here we go. Now when I mark and press F9, it can find the function. You can also type pwd in the command prompt, means print working directory, and see which directory you are currently in. There are a few rules of thumb that you should consider when writing functions. First of all, your functions should have a clear and simple purpose. It should be well defined what the inputs are and what the output is. The function name should be very describing and telling of what the function does. The function shouldn't be too long. Usually you shouldn't have more than what you can have on screen without scrolling inside a function. Usually that would be less than 20 lines, but almost always less than 100 lines. Of course there can be arguments sometimes to have longer functions than that, but these are the rules of thumb. Whenever you find yourself reusing parts of your code, you should consider making a function. That'll make it easier for you to reuse your code, and if you decide to change your code at some point, you only have to make changes one place inside that function.